holidays as well. So, without further ado, today we are going to talk about the murder of Joanna Yeates. Joanna Claire Yates was born on April 19th, 1985 in Hampshire, England, to David and Teresa Yates. Joanna went to private schools before attending Peter Simons College and then graduated with her degree in agricultural landscape from Bristol College. She also got a postgraduate degree and continued her education even further by receiving her master's degree in garden design. So she was a very intelligent, very well-educated woman. In December of 2008, Joanna met and began dating a 25-year-old architect named Greg Reardon. They had both worked at the same architectural firm. By 2009, the couple had moved in together, and then they ended up relocating to Bristol when the company relocated there. They found an apartment to rent in a large converted house in the very affluent area of Clifton. These two were really described as the perfect couple. They loved spending time outdoors together. Joanna enjoyed rowing, surfing, biking, and snowboarding. They had a lot of the same interests. They seemed extremely happy, and the couple even adopted a kitty together. Toward the end of 2010, Joanna and Greg were really excited and getting ready for the holidays. They were heading back to Hampshire to spend time with family and friends, and Joanna was so excited to be able to go back for the holidays and spend time with her friends and family. Sadly, Joanna would not live to see Christmas. On Friday, December 17th, 2010, Joanna kisses Greg goodbye as he heads to Sheffield to visit his family. After Greg leaves, Joanna heads to the pub after work to meet some co-workers for a drink. So she goes to this bar called the Bristol Ram around 6:30 and orders a drink. Now, this is a Friday before the holidays really kick off. The bar is full of people. Everyone is kind of drinking and catching up, and it's a great night. Joanna was her happy, normal self that evening. She was smiling and laughing and having a great time, although she did mention to friends she was not looking forward to being alone all weekend while Greg was visiting family. Around 8 p.m., Joanna decides to leave, and she leaves on foot, making the 30-minute walk back to her apartment. On her way home, she stops and buys a couple bottles of cider, and then stops at another store and buys a pizza. After leaving Desca, which was where she bought this pizza, she only had a few minutes left on her walk before she would make it home. In these last few minutes, she calls a friend, and the two chit-chat for a couple minutes and then decide they're gonna meet up when Joanna makes it to Bristol for the holidays. Around 8:40 p.m., Joanna arrives back at her apartment, and remember, her apartment is a home that has been subdivided into several apartments. So she gets home and she begins making dinner. Over the course of that weekend, Greg would text Joanna because he's very busy doing stuff with his family. So he's having a lot of fun, and he figures he'll see Joanna when he gets home Sunday. When Greg arrives at the apartment, he's surprised that Joanna isn't there. It's cold, it's dark, it's nearly midnight, and so he decides to call her phone because he can't figure out where she would be. And his heart sinks when he hears her cell phone ringing from the pocket of her jacket that is still inside the home. Greg can't really figure out a scenario in which she would leave late at night without her phone and without her coat. This is when Greg begins to look around the apartment, and what he sees is very alarming. The couple's cat was very unsettled, and he appeared to be starving as if no one had taken care of him all weekend. What's more, Joanna's keys and purse were on the table, and at this point Greg realizes something is very wrong. Greg calls Joanna's parents, and her mother, Teresa, is like, she is not here, but Greg, call the police. Something is definitely wrong. And then her parents immediately leave and make the 2-hour drive to Bristol. Her mother would later say that she remembers arriving at Joanna and Greg's apartment, and she just began kind of frantically searching for clues about where Joanna might be. She found the receipt for the pizza Joanna had bought, but there was no sign of the pizza itself. The garbage hadn't been emptied. There was no leftover pizza in the refrigerator. There wasn't even like the packaging that the pizza came in. Teresa was so scared and so desperate that she began walking around the neighborhood, pounding on the trunks of parked cars, thinking maybe her daughter had been abducted and was being held in a trunk somewhere. Teresa said that even in those early morning hours where she was so desperate to find her daughter, she wasn't thinking rationally. She knew this was not going to have a good outcome. When police arrived at the apartment and began speaking with Greg and Joanna's parents, they realized Joanna Yeates had no reason to willingly disappear on her own. This would have been very out of character for her. She had never done anything like this in the past. There were no mental health issues. She had good relationships with everyone in her family. She wasn't taking any medications. Nothing pointed to Joanna leaving on her own. So police filed a missing persons case that night. There was no forced entry in the apartment, so this led police to believe that Joanna may have known her abductor. So they began trying to retrace her steps on the night she went missing. They interviewed her co-workers, who all said she was acting normally. Nothing at all had seemed off about her that night. They pulled CCTV footage of her walk home the night in question. They were going door to door asking neighbors if they had heard or seen anything. But they really had nothing to go on. There were no witnesses. There was no CCTV footage right around her apartment. Joanna was just gone. On December 21st, Joanna's parents and Greg pleaded with the public for her safe return at a police press conference. 2 days later, at another police press conference, Joanna's father David spoke about her disappearance. He said, "I think she was abducted after getting home from her flat. I have no idea of the circumstances surrounding the abduction. I feel sure she would have not gone out by herself, leaving all these she was taken away somewhere. Joanna's disappearance was big news. Everyone had heard about the Bristol woman. She was on the front page of every newspaper. On Christmas morning, a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Birch, were out walking their dog along Longwood Lane, about 3 miles from Joanna's apartment. Near a wall that separated a road from a quarry, they noticed a snow-covered mound. They sensed that something wasn't right, but they just kept walking. However, this couple, who was well aware that there was a missing woman, decided they needed to go back and make sure this really was just dirt covered in snow. So as they walk closer to get a look, they notice a pair of jeans, and then they make out the shape of a body. So they immediately call police. Investigators arrived on the scene and found the frozen body of Joanna Yeates. She was fully clothed except for one gray sock that was missing off her left foot, and she was curled up on her side. Police realized right away that Joanna's body had been laying there for several days. And while her body hadn't been well hidden, there had been a lot of snowfall since it had been dumped in that had kind of hidden her and kept her from being discovered sooner. When Joanna's parents were called and notified that their daughter's remains had been discovered, Teresa remembers feeling a sense of relief. She was convinced at this point that her daughter was dead, but she had been terrified that they would never find her body, and not knowing for sure was agonizing, so at least the Yates had some closure. An autopsy was scheduled to begin the next day, but it couldn't be completed because the coroner had to wait for Joanna's frozen body to thaw out. Police initially believed it was possible Joanna had just froze to death because there were no signs of trauma on her body. However, detectives announced on December 28th that the case was now being treated as a homicide investigation. The pathologist who performed the autopsy had found that Joanna had died from strangulation. She died several days before her body was discovered. It was confirmed that Joanna had never eaten that pizza that she had bought on her way home. She had also not been sexually assaulted, so police launched this huge murder investigation. 80 investigators were assigned to this case, and it was one of the largest police investigations in history. Police really urged the public to come forward with any information they may have that would help them catch Joanna's killer. Of course, Joanna's boyfriend was the first suspect that police needed to rule out. His laptop and phone were taken as evidence, and they did forensic testing on those items, but he had a solid alibi, and they found nothing to suggest he had anything to do with her murder, so he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Police reviewed thousands of tips and began the process of following up on every tip. They searched through 100 hours of CCTV footage, 293 tons of garbage, which had been seized from around Joanna's apartment. Crime Stoppers came out and offered a $10,000 reward, and the Sun newspaper also offered a $50,000 reward. Police told people in the area to make sure and keep their homes was inside waiting had likely known Joanna would come home alone. Police began looking into Joanna's landlord, a retired teacher named Christopher Jeffries. He lived in the same building as Joanna, but in an adjacent apartment. Police began questioning him, and once they began questioning him, they began to remember how helpful he had been when they had first come around, almost as if he was inserting himself into the situation. He had given police his original statement, and then a few days later he had called back to add more details, so police were thinking this guy could be a possible person of interest. Christopher had also told police that Craig had mentioned to him he would be going away for the weekend, but Joanna would be behind. So police realized Christopher not only had a key to the apartment, he knew Joanna would be there alone. So they began to theorize that perhaps he was waiting for her in her apartment to assault her, but she screamed and it foiled his plans and he killed her. On December 30th at 7 a.m., Christopher Jeffries was arrested on suspicion of murder in the Joanna Yeates murder. He was taken to the police station for questioning, and a team of forensic investigators went to search his apartment. Police told Christopher that they believed he had let himself into her apartment and then killed her. Joanna and Craig had this neighbor, this Dutch inventor named Vincent de Bach, and he had seen reports that Christopher Jeffries had been arrested, so he's in Holland for the holidays, but he calls up police and he's like, I saw that you have Jeffries arrested, and come to think of it, his car changed directions the night that Joanna was murdered. I noticed it parked one way in the early evening, and then early the next morning it was parked the other direction. So police now know Jeffries had left, and he had claimed before that he had been home the whole night and he hadn't gone anywhere. But now they have this witness saying, no, his car definitely went somewhere. So police send detectives out to Holland to get an official statement and also to get a DNA swab, which was just normal. They got their statement, and the police who took the DNA swab of Tobec noticed that he was a little hesitant to give his DNA, hesitant enough that she noted it in the police files. Christopher Jeffries' car was forensically searched because police now believe he used his car to transport Joanna's body. Jeffries was questioned for 3 days. He was kept in custody and questioned before being released without being charged with anything. DNA found on Joanna's body, which police believed belonged to the killer, was not a match for Christopher Jeffries. They had nothing to tie him to this case, and he was officially eliminated as a suspect. On January 4th, a clinical forensic psychologist who had worked as a criminal profiler joined the case to help find a suspect. Police began talking about doing mass DNA screenings, and detectives began tracking the movements of several hundred registered sex offenders in the area. Then forensic scientists made a break in the case. The traces of DNA that were found on Joanna's body were matched to Craig and Joanna's neighbor, Vincent Tobec. Police find out that Vincent had been home alone on the night of the murder. He lived in the apartment right next to Joanna and Craig with his girlfriend, but she had been out that night with friends. of his safety, he was moved from a Bristol prison and placed on suicide watch at Long Lartin Prison. He maintained he had absolutely nothing to do with Joanna's murder, and he claimed police were setting him up. But then, on February 8th, he admitted to a prison chaplain that he had murdered Joanna, and he told this chaplain he intended to confess. On May 5th, 2011, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter, but he denied murdering Joanna. His guilty plea to manslaughter was rejected, and his trial began on October 4th of that same year. The prosecutors painted a picture of what they believed happened the night Joanna was killed. They think Vincent was inside her apartment waiting for her when she got home, and within minutes of arriving, he had used sufficient force to kill her. They described her injuries, which included bruising, cuts, and a fractured nose, and they said the struggle was lengthy and her death was slow and painful. The prosecution, however, did not offer a motive for the murder. They had no idea why he had done it. Vincent's defense claimed that the killing had not been sexually motivated. They instead painted a different picture of the night. They said that she had flirtily and suggestively invited Vincent to come into her apartment for a drink. They had a drink, and when he went to kiss her, she began to scream. He obviously had just been reading the situation wrong, and he covered her mouth with his hand so she couldn't scream because he was startled. And after 20 seconds, she went limp. He denied there had been a struggle, and he told the court he had panicked when he realized she was dead and dumped her body. The jury deliberated for 2 days before coming back with a guilty verdict. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. Unfortunately, Beck said his memory of the night is very patchy and he doesn't really remember what happened that night. So, to the torment of Joanna's family, the exact events, what happened and why, will probably never be known. Joanna Yeates' parents said of their daughter, quote, "She was a beautiful and talented young lady who was destined to fly high. Her life was stolen from her, and she was stolen from us. Our lives stopped from the time we knew Joe was missing. We gained a little solace from the fact that a high point in Joe's life was her graduation in November, when her life was perfect. Our grief and sadness includes experiences in which she missed out on, in terms of family and children and rising through her profession. For us, we will always miss the presence which came with her, hearing her voice, her lightness, and standing back with pride and watching her go through life." So this was the Christmas murder of Joanna Yeates. I just quickly want to cite my sources. I got information from a